This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze. And my guest today is talking about a subject that is so important to me. About 10 years ago, I was at my ENT's office for a routine visit. And he said to me, "This is not routine. I have to send you to a surgeon." And I looked at him and I said, "Why?" And he said, "You have an ear canal that does not look normal." And for years, I had been wearing tubes in my ears because when I gave birth to my son, something happened. Nobody seems to know. And every year they would take the tubes out. It didn't work. They'd have to put them back in again.
Wow.
But the one tube infected my ear. And he kept saying to me, "Can you hear me? Do you understand what I'm talking about?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Okay, here's the name and let me know what the doctor says." And I met with the surgeon. And the first thing he said to me was, "Your ear canal has totally collapsed. And there's something on the other side of it. I don't know what it is. We have to go in, clean it all out, and then I can let you know afterwards." To make my story just a little bit more interesting, Shari, even though my left side was marked, he went into my right ear first
Oh,
and created a hole in the eardrum, which meant that my hearing was going to be compromised. When he got over to the left ear and said, "Oh my, this is the ear we're supposed to do," at least I'm assuming that's what he said. I was asleep. He reconstructed the whole thing, but he used a reconstruction method that I've since learned was not right, and came out of surgery and barely could understand what anybody was talking about. And he said, "Yeah, in about a month, you should go get fitted for hearing aids," which I did. But I didn't tell most people I was wearing them because it was like, you're going to think I'm some little old lady, and that's not how I want to be perceived.
mhm.
So I've been wearing hearing aids for 10 years. I've learned all the new technologies. I keep changing them. But you know what? It's still not the same hearing I used to have. So talk to me about why you're so interested in this subject.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. It's great to meet you.
Same here.
Well, I am very passionate about hearing loss advocacy. So I first noticed my hearing loss in my mid-20s, but my journey really began well before that. My father had hearing loss, so I grew up as a child watching him struggle with communication. And he was so stigmatized and embarrassed by his hearing loss. He would do almost anything to hide it. So he would often be found by him, off by himself at a party with his back to the festivities. And I didn't understand why as a child, but when I developed my own hearing loss, I realized he probably was struggling to hear in that loud environment of the party. And he was just too exhausted and had sort of given up trying. And over time, he really isolated himself from his life. So when I was diagnosed with hearing loss, I was terrified that this was going to be my life, that I was going to be isolated. I was not going to have strong relationships in my family, with my friends. And I went to the audiologist. They told me I had mild hearing loss, but there wasn't much to do about it. It gave me the perfect excuse to ignore it for years and years. But once I had children, I realized that I was actually setting a terrible example for them. And because my hearing loss is genetic, I knew I needed to do a better job. They were watching me do the same things I had watched my father do. So I kind of did a 360 or a 180, whatever the opposite one is. and started to tell everyone about my hearing loss. I started to wear my hearing aids all the time. And I decided that I was going to refuse to let my hearing loss isolate me. And it's hard work, right? You
It
probably
is
know that. It's
absolutely.
hard work, but it's worth it. And then I decided to become an advocate because I wanted to help make the world an easier and more accessible place for my children should they develop hearing loss themselves, and to just set a better example for them. Hearing loss is so stigmatized, and it should not be. And so the more that I can be open about it, you can be open about it, the more everyone can be open about it, the better off we all will be.
You are so right. I mean, I remember when I got my first hearing aids, my hair was short, but it was still long enough around my ears that my audiologist was great. She showed me that, if I got the silver ones, it's going to be noticed. But if I got these bronze ones, it wasn't going to be as noticed. And I was okay with it in the beginning, as long as I could hide them. A few people knew I wore them, but most people didn't. Um, but I was still saying a lot of, "What? I didn't hear you," or "Can you explain that again?" And I was starting to irritate people, and I didn't understand why. And my son was going to the college where I was working, and he came into my office one day and he closed the door and he said, "Mom, you have to tell people that you're wearing hearing aids." And I said, "No, I'm working with so many very young people. It's going to isolate me." He said, "No, you're already isolated. I hear the talk on campus. You know, Something's wrong with Karen. Does she have a brain tumor? Does she have ADD? What is her problem?" And so I started telling people, and it worked and it didn't work in the beginning.
Hmm.
Because one of the hardest things I was having, and maybe you can relate to this, is if somebody whispers, I don't hear it.
Yeah.
You know, and don't even try whispering in my ear, because that's only going to make everything crackle and go crazy. And some of my coworkers figured it out and started whispering around me. So I was missing things that I had to do. And I was being called into HR. "Why didn't you do this?" And be like, "Do what?" And I finally said, "Hey, I need some accommodation here."
Yeah.
And that means send it to me in an email, or sit down and have a conversation so I can hear you. Please don't whisper it to me in the hallway.
Mhm.
I don't get it. And they chose not to accommodate me. And yes, I probably could have hired an attorney like many people, but you know what? I'm not going to be in court for years over this. And I knew that's what it would take.
Wow.
Um, and so I finally, found a way to deal with it until one day they asked me to take a leave of absence for health reasons. And then they told me I abandoned my job. So that's what I started advocating more, as you are, that I wear hearing aids. I can hear fairly well, but there are certain tones I can't hear. If you're not close enough to me, I may not hear you. Yours, is genetic. So knowing that in the beginning, did it make you feel better about it? Because mine was actually accidental, but being at the age that I was, people just assumed it was because of my age.
Right. I wish I could say yes, that I felt better about it, but at the beginning, I did not. Because I think I had that role model. My father sort of
Right.
modeled that hearing loss was shameful. It was something to be embarrassed about. And it really took me a very long time to realize that it's not, that everybody has something. And this is just part of who I am. It's not the defining thing of who I am. But what I found over the years is the more that I tell people about it and the more open I am about it, and I don't apologize for it, I just explain it. And people end up telling me something about themselves. Oh, well, you know what? I actually wear hearing aids also, or my father wears hearing aids, or my aunt wears hearing aids. Or it's such a pervasive phenomenon, right? But all of us are sort of in our little silos hiding. And what we need to do is reach out, make connections with people. And what I find when I advocate is most of the time, not all the time, most of the time, if you explain to people, I wear hearing aids and this is what I need you to do so that we can communicate better,
Right.
most of the time they're willing to do it. But it's really on us, I think, for better or for worse, the
Yeah.
people with the hearing loss, to not only self-identify, but to be very specific about what we're asking the other person to do to accommodate us. And if they want to have a conversation, if they want to communicate with us, they're going to benefit from this as well.
Well, and it's interesting. I've been working part-time on the weekends in a big box store. I do training there. And I started noticing that the younger personnel, if an older person comes into the department, they don't adjust their voices. And sometimes the hearing aids are very noticeable, sometimes they're not. And so I started talking to them about that. Okay. Watch the individual when you talk to them. If they look like they're almost in pain, that means they're searching to hear what you're saying. Okay. So bring your voice up a little bit. And my husband has the problem when he brings his voice up, he basically shouts it to me. And it's like, there's a difference between raising your voice up and shouting it out. But he's my husband. I love him, and I'll probably have to deal with that the rest of my life. But my son knows when I say to him, I'm having trouble hearing you, he just raises his voice up and he uses more tones when he's talking to me. So I can get that feeling. It's not monotone. It's like, oh, I'm losing you. Because hearing aids are just that. They're an aid. They
Yes.
are not new ears.
Oh, 100%. And I'm so glad you said that, because I think that's one of the things that is sort of a myth about hearing aids, is that they're like glasses, right? Most of us, we put on glasses and our eyesight goes back to normal, right? It sharpens and we can just see. Hearing aids are not like that. They do not bring your hearing back to, normal, quote unquote, right? What they do is they make things louder, and they're very helpful. So I'm
Right.
not trying to, say bad things about hearing aids. I just think it's important to understand what they can and they cannot do. So they do make things louder. They do make it easier to understand speech in a quiet environment. But one thing they're not good at doing is reading our mind, right? So
Yeah.
if you go into a loud setting, they are going to amplify everything. And that sometimes makes it harder to hear, because you've got the dishes clanking, you've got the air conditioning running, and it drowns out the sound of the voice of the person across from you that you're really trying to hear. So one of the things that I really advocate for, and also in the book Here and Beyond that I wrote with my co-author Gael Hannan, is that hearing aids are just the first piece of the puzzle. We have something we call a three-legged stool of skills that we as hearing aid wearers and people with hearing loss need to embrace to live well with it. And technology and hearing aids are just one small piece of that.
So if it's one small piece, and many of us have spent thousands of dollars for our hearing aids, what's the other pieces? I mean, I'm
Yeah.
told, my doctor told me the last time I saw him, he said, you're a great lip reader. And I don't even realize that's what I'm doing. And I said to him, oh, no, I'm not. And he said, I just want you to watch something. And he turned his back and he said something. And I picked up a little bit of it. He turned around. He said it again. I said, oh, that's what I missed. And he
Mhm.
goes, and it's not the way I said it, but how I said it to you. You were reading my lips and my facial features.
Yep.
Makes a big difference.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the three-legged stool, one of the legs is technology, and so hearing aids or cochlear implants, depending on the degree of your hearing loss, are part of that. But there are also a lot of other tools, and I'm not sure if you or your listeners would know about them. There are things called remote microphones. So you can give like a yoga teacher or a speaker or someone a microphone that they can wear that will then put their sound of their voice directly into your hearing devices.
Right.
So that helps a lot in a variety of situations. Also, captioning is a wonderful tool. You can turn it on in Zoom, actually. So I'll
Right.
show you how to do that afterwards. But you can have all your video meetings can be captioned. There are many, many apps that you can get on your phone where you can get free speech to text captioning automatically, obviously on the television. So there are these other tools that are out there. Hearing loops technology, if you have a T coil in your hearing aid, you can turn to that setting. Going to a theater or a large auditorium that has a hearing loop, you can get the sound system sound played directly into
Right.
your hearing aids. So there are a number of tools besides just the devices. So that's leg one, all of that technology. Leg two is something we call mind shifts. And this goes back to a little bit what we were talking about at the beginning. It's that ability to change your own attitude about your hearing loss, right? And many people are stigmatized by it. I know you were saying you didn't want people to sort of look at you a different way. And one of the mind shifts that we have in the book, and the attitude is, I don't like to advertise my hearing loss. People will think I'm old or slow, right? And I think many of us feel that way.
All right.
But the mind shift is being open about my hearing loss will help me communicate better. Trying to hide my hearing loss leads to misunderstandings. And so it's sort of just flipping that idea on its head. And we have a lot of different mind shifts, but it's the idea of being open about your hearing loss, accepting it, and understanding that the goal is shifting from hearing better to communicating better, because that's really what it's all about.
Right.
And then the third leg of the stool is something we call communication game changers. And that's all about behavioral changes and non-technical solutions. So speech reading, like you were talking about, using communication best practices is a big deal. So you were saying how your son, raises his voice a little
Right.
bit. There are other things that he can do, right? People need to get our attention first before they start talking to us. That way we know to be looking at them so we can use some of those speech reading tools. Things like being aware of our surroundings, lowering extraneous noises, making sure that it's lit enough so that we can see the person's face to use our speech reading. Speaking clearly, right? I mean, shouting, I tell people shouting actually doesn't help because
No, it
it
doesn't.
distorts the way the mouth looks.
Right.
And so it's finding that right level as well as the clarity of the way the person is speaking. So it's all this being said, the point is that the devices are, one small piece of all this. They're a critical piece of it, right? Without that, a lot of those other things won't work. But there are so many things that we have at our disposal to help us communicate better.
And, I think this is something that we need to learn early on, the same way we learn about wearing glasses. Okay. I think I was maybe 8 or 9 years old when I realized that my eyes got very tired in school when I was reading. And my teacher kept noticing that I was rubbing either one eye or the other, not both. It was just one or the other. And so they contacted my parents. I went and had an eye exam. Um, the only reason they gave me glasses at the time was that I was nearsighted in one eye, farsighted in the other. And the doctor said he had to get my eyes to sort of balance out. Wearing glasses, sure, back in the day, they called you four eyes, whatever. But my parents made sure I picked out some really cute frames. And I became the talk of the town, but in a good way. Okay. So we don't really think anything of somebody wearing glasses today. In fact, some people wear it just because they think it looks good, and there's no prescription in it. But when it comes to hearing aids, we still get, that connotation that you must be old. Yet, how many babies today have a cochlear implant or some form of hearing aids? It's across the board, but we don't talk about the younger people. We only talk about, oh, you must be getting old. You must need to retire. Like,
absolutely not. Yeah.
and I showed people something different when I started wearing mine, is I just wear them all the time. Whereas my mother-in-law, when she got them, she didn't learn how to have them adjusted. She didn't like them. She'd take them in and out. And then she eventually lost them. And she was so excited she lost them because she said they were too expensive to replace.
Oh.
So
yeah.
First thing I say is make sure that you go to somebody who knows how to get you fitted properly for your hearing aids. And once you have them, you have to wear them and learn how to wear them.
Absolutely. I mean, we actually hear with our brain almost as much, if not more, than we're actually hearing with our ears. And so it's very important, and I had to learn this the hard way too, that you wear your hearing aids consistently, because your brain does need to build those new pathways and does need to learn to understand what different sounds are and get used to that. So eventually some of that background noise maybe will fade a little bit into the background because your brain says, oh, okay, that's the air conditioning. Let's not focus on that. Let's focus on the voices that we're trying to hear. The other thing about it, you were talking about sort of that tiredness you felt, rubbing your eyes. And there is something very specifically called listening fatigue that happens for people with hearing loss. And the reason for that is because I like to think of it, it's sort of like playing a game of Wheel of Fortune, right? So some of the letters are filled in, other letters are blank, and you're trying to take all the pieces of information that you know, the context, the subject, the speech reading, the sounds you are hearing, and put it together to try and make sense of what someone is actually saying. And this takes a lot of mental effort, right? And so at the end of a long day of listening, I become very, very tired. And so it's important to use our hearing aids regularly because it will lower that listening fatigue, as well as some of those other tools that I was talking about. The more that we have to make communication easier, the easier it is for our brain, and we can have more stamina that way.
And I find it interesting when my husband and I travel in a car, even as from here to the grocery store. And I'll go even more specifically in the winter, if his winter coat is sort of like up here, the road noise, his voice, if I wasn't totally concentrating on what he said, it's all muffled to me. And when I ask him to repeat it, and I know it's frustrating for the other party because they feel like they're constantly having to say things over and over again. So I like your concept of the person who wants to speak to you, try to be a little bit more deliberate in letting you know that they're going to speak to you. And when I realize it's his coat, I sort of like bend it down. I try to pat it so it stays down. But some of these things you're going to learn just because you're doing them. There's not necessarily an advocate who's going to give you a whole list of things to change. Some of them you're just going to have to learn based on the people that you're around.
Absolutely. And there's no sort of like operating manual that someone hands you, right, with your hearing
Right.
aid. These are all the things that you need to know. And that was actually one of the reasons why my co-author and I wrote this book, Here and Beyond, Live Skillfully with Hearing Loss, because we think it is that operating manual that we need to get when we have hearing loss or we get hearing aids. It tells us all those things that you were just talking about, that it takes years to learn, right? It takes years to figure this out on our own. And what we try to do is sort of take all of our knowledge of what we've learned over this time and put it in one place. So, for your listeners who are experiencing hearing loss or have a family member or someone they're close to, this is a book that's not only for the person with hearing loss, it's for their friends and family too. It's a fun read, it's an easy read. There's lots of like humor and good stories, but there are also a lot of information in there to help people live better, and that's really our goal, for it.
And what some people also don't understand, that there are some hearing aids, they're just true amplifiers. There are some, that can be uh, tweaked, and do more than just amplifying. But if your hearing aids aren't fitted properly, they're not going to work properly. And I found that out the hard way, and so did my first audiologist. We tried using the tips and, that came with it, and it didn't work. Then she found another brand and we tried those. And finally, we realized that we needed to have a mold made for each of my ears. So, yes, I can pick a pair of hearing aids, but I now have to have the molds made for it. I also realized that I started losing weight, and now these hearing aids I've had for a little over a year aren't fitting as well. And I met with my audiologist, and we talked about it, and she said, this is how much it's going to cost to make new molds. You're going to have to give up your hearing aids for a couple of weeks while they're being made and fitted. But I do have my old hearing aids that I can wear in a pinch. Today, now we have these hearing aids that are being sold over the counter. How does a person decide, well, hey, this is costing me a fraction of if I went to a specialist. So, hey, why don't I just buy those?
Right. That's a great question. Over the counter hearing aids are specifically designed for people with mild to moderate hearing loss. So, how do you know if you have mild to moderate hearing loss? The first step really is to get a hearing test. You can go to an audiologist and do that, or you can do it online. There are many good places now. You just wear your headphones, you plug in your AirPods or whatever, and you can take the test right on your smartphone. So I'm very excited about over-the-counter hearing aids, but I don't think they would work for me, right? My hearing loss is probably too severe. Yours may be as
Right.
well. We really need an audiologist partner who is going to do those things that you said. Make sure that it's fitted properly, that will understand that the different brands sound a little bit different. People have different preferences. Make sure that they're telling you about all the other tools that you need to use. But for people who maybe are just having trouble hearing situationally, maybe it really is just the start of their hearing loss. An over-the-counter device is a great option. You can program it yourself, and there have been studies that show that for people with that category of hearing loss, the way that they program and the way that they can communicate themselves versus having an audiologist do it, it ends up being pretty close to the same. So it's not, unfortunately, it's not like, oh wow, I can just go buy this cheaper version.
Right.
Really depends on the degree of your hearing loss and the type of assistance that you need. But at least now there are products that are available for those types of hearing losses to get people sort of used to taking care of their hearing. And if it does get worse, they can transition to something else.
Exactly. Exactly. So I try to compare that to going into the pharmacy and buying reading glasses. Okay. You don't have to have a prescription. You try them on, you try reading something, you find that magnification that works for you. Or it doesn't really work well. You need something more customized. I know when I had my cataract surgery, the doctor said, oh, just go out and buy a cheapy pair. And I did. I think it cost me $5. Problem is I'd be working at my desk where I need them for close up, and I get up and try to walk across the room, and I was getting dizzy. So I finally said, okay, I know I need something that suits me better. I had these made. Reading is at the bottom. There's nothing at the top. I can go all day with them. And so that's what I think people have to understand about their hearing as well. Like you said, the first step is having a hearing test. You may think you're not hearing well. And I actually had one a couple of weeks ago because I kept saying, there's something wrong with my hearing. The hearing aids aren't working the way they're supposed to. And I first went and had my ears cleaned, made sure that, that wasn't the issue. Went back and had the hearing test. And they said to me, nothing has changed in 4 years, Karen. So it's either something you are not concentrating on, or, we can't tune them up anymore. If we do, they're going to really blow out your hearing. And I realized once I had these two things taken care of. My hearing hadn't gotten any worse. My ears were clean. It was my attitude. I had gotten lazy because when I work all day, I have on a headset and I can hear whether I have my hearing aids in or not. And I wanted it to be as clear as that all day long. And it just isn't. And so it's like, okay, I got gotten lazy. Now I've got to get back to square one. How do clients find you? I mean, so many of us struggle with this. So
yeah, we are trying to be as loud and as everywhere as we can be, but it's true. So I have a website and a blog that is livingwithhearingloss.com. So that is a great way to connect. Also, my book, Here and Beyond, Live Skillfully with Hearing Loss. And there's a website for that, hereandbeyond.com. Also, I would recommend that people learn about Hearing Loss Association of America. It's the largest consumer nonprofit in the United States that advocates for people with hearing loss in Washington, right? They were very instrumental in getting the Over-the-Counter Hearing Aid Act passed. They make sure that they're advocating for captioning on programs, for phones that work with hearing aids, all these important sort of behind the scenes things. They also have chapters in local markets where if you wanted to connect with other people with hearing loss, which for me personally was a life-changing experience. It took away that stigma and I learned so much from them. HLAA also has these local chapters that people can learn about and perhaps joining a Zoom meeting that they have or an in-person meeting that they have.
I love that. I love that. And for those of you listening, we'll put this all in the show notes so you don't have to memorize everything that Shari just told you. But I do recommend that if there is somebody in your family who is struggling, whether you are or not, try to understand it more. Get the knowledge that you may need. It's not easy for the person who's wearing the hearing aids, as well as not easy for those of you who are trying to communicate with us. But, if we work together, it'll be so much easier. And I'm so glad, Shari, that you're a good example for your kids, because it had to have been tough for you when you found your diagnosis, watching your dad struggle, thinking, oh, am I going to live that same life? And hopefully he's not, he finally got hearing aids, can I imagine, or not?
He did, but it was really, I think, more about his mental attitude. And so that's such a critical piece of
Right.
it, to let others in to help you, like you were saying. I think I loved what you just said about how, it's hard for everyone, but it also benefits everyone when
Right.
both sides can make that little bit of extra effort.
Well, thank you for joining us today. We'll get all that in the show notes. And, if you're listening to this, contact Shari and read her book. That probably is the first thing we all should do. Have a great day.
So much
Thanks for joining me.
thank you so much for having me. It was great to meet you.
Sure.